My name is Itzea Beta. I'm with the Office of Public Participation, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today for the State Water Resources Control Board's Safe and Affordable Fund for Equity and Resilience, better known as SAFER. The program's Aquifer Risk Map Feedback webinar, which is hosted by the Department of Water Quality and moderated by the Office of Public Participation. This webinar is being held 100% virtually as well as broadcast publicly in English. In addition, we are recording today's event in an effort to ensure that the recording of this event will actually be available for future reference in case you want to revisit it or you were unable to be with us today. So here on the screen, you see that this is the Waterboards collective mission. And as we work together, we try to achieve our mission through an array of programs established within our major divisions and regions. And I just want to advise that as it's the Waterboard's mission to preserve, enhance, and restore California's water resources for the benefit of present and future generations. We want to begin this meeting by acknowledging the groups who have and who continue to experience economic, environmental, and social disadvantages as a result of historical marginalization and whose daily lives are impacted by racism and injustices. We also want to thank each person who continues to do their part to fight the fires that were raging in our state and hold those who are affected by the fires and are struggling with poor air quality in strength and solidarity. We know that this meeting is happening during a very challenging time. We recognize the disproportionate impact this global pandemic has had and unfortunately will continue to have on many of you, and especially on the marginalized communities. So as a reminder, today's work, the work that we're doing, including this event, should strengthen and empower the Indigenous community and community voices as we work together to provide clean, safe, and affordable drinking water to all Californians. So let's begin by discussing what today's meeting goals are. So today we will cover the following. We are going to provide an introduction and background of the Aquifer Risk Map development. We are going to review the Aquifer Risk Map methodology as well as a presentation on the draft map. And we will also provide an opportunity for the public to comment and provide feedback on the topics discussed and covered in today's presentation. So here you'll see that there are various ways in which we are allowing the public to participate. So again, we do want to thank all of you for finding a way to join us virtually today. We thank you for your patience and understanding as we quickly move to a 100% virtual meeting space so that we can adapt to the current public health concerns. We are doing our best to make sure that everyone can participate in an effective way and that this time is valuable for you, and so that we don't expect delays. But we do ask for your patience in advance should any difficulties arise. So during today's event, attendees will be able to submit questions through Zoom's Q&A feature, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can input questions that you would like answered throughout the event, and the host and panelists will be able to see your questions and be able to answer those as they relate to today's event. I do want to advise that this Q&A function does allow attendees to upvote questions. By upvoting, you simply click thumbs up on a question that you are also wondering about or would like answered, and it actually does prioritize that question and moves it based on the number of votes to the very top. So that way staff today can understand that that is an important question and you would like that question answered. So today we will also have a period of open discussion. So not only do you have the Q&A function, but you can also submit questions through email by submitting them to the SAFER email address that you see here. We do have a staff member that is ready and reviewing those emails to ensure that all of your questions are answered, but we are also providing the opportunity to provide verbal comments or questions. So when the time comes, we will ask those that would like to speak to raise their virtual hand, and we will then find you in the attendee list and ask you to unmute yourself. But as a reminder, I am aware that there are some attendees that are joining us today by phone. You also have the opportunity to participate in those comments and discussions. So if you'd like to raise your hand via phone, you would simply press *9. That would then raise your hand, and then we would then ask for you to press *6 to unmute yourself. And then lastly, this event is being held on the Cal EPA website, so it's being webcast. If you are watching this webinar through the webcast only and you would like to ask questions or share a comment, the best way to do so is to submit your question or comment through the safer@waterboards.ca.gov email box, just as stated earlier. And then before we get started, I just wanted to advise that today we do have a lot of state water board staff that are assisting and supporting behind the scenes to ensure that everything runs smoothly and that we have as few participation bumps as possible. But there is that possibility. So I just want to thank all of them. I want to acknowledge them for their dedication and thank you for being here to support. All right, so we are going to move into introducing our presenters today. So today we have two presenters. We have Scott Seyfried and Emily Houlihan. And for the beginning portion of today's event, I would like to introduce Scott, who will go ahead and lead us into today's discussion. Go ahead, Scott, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Itze. Yeah, my name is Scott Seyfried. I'm a geologist with the State Waterboards Division of Water Quality in the Groundwater Ambient Monitoring and Assessment Unit. My role for this presentation that we've prepared is to provide some background and introduce the topic at hand. Basically, item number 1 that Itze walked us through. It should take about 10 minutes or so on the background item. And then I'll be turning it over to Emily Houlihan, who is a staff geologist with the State Water Board Gamma Unit. So what I want to do in the next 10 minutes is, again, provide a little refresher or framework, or if it's new to you, a quick introduction to this project and where it fits into the SAFER program and what the project goals are and our timeline. So Emily has the slides here, so I'm going to ask her to advance. So this is a org chart with a lot of information on it, but we wanted to try to get across, if you're following the SAFER program, where this project fits into the bigger picture. And so you see on the top line there, the Division of Financial Assistance. They are in charge of really doing the work of prioritizing funding in the formation of a fund expenditure plan every year. The Division of Drinking Water is working on, and I would imagine a lot of folks on this call have been participating in those SAFER workshops as well. They are doing the work of focusing on community water systems where there are data available for the performance of those community water systems and analyzing the relative risk of those systems in providing safe and affordable drinking water. The third box over there is the Division of Water Quality, and our involvement here is to focus on risk prioritization for state small systems and domestic wells. And the reason that we are entering into the process at that level is because in California, we don't directly regulate domestic wells. Therefore, we don't have a robust data set for water quality from domestic wells. Therefore, what we do is, as the Gamma unit, we do an assessment of the ambient groundwater quality that may be accessed by domestic wells, and in essence, overlay where domestic wells are on that water quality map as a way to arrive at a risk estimate of risks to those domestic wells and state small systems. And Emily will walk you through that in much more detail. And then the last box, maybe one of the more important ones, is Office of Public Participation, who is running this meeting very well. The other part of this org chart that's important is collaboration. There is lots of collaboration going on between us and the other divisions in blue, and also the other partners. And in particular, what our work that you're going to see this morning, we have been working with the UC Berkeley CEC Water Equity Science Shop and OEHA and the Department of Water Resources, who have recently come out with their drought and risk mapping as well. So we're not working in isolation here, where we are partnering up with the folks at the bottom of the org chart as well here. So next slide. So I want to just give a quick review of what's driving this particular project, which is producing an aquifer risk map. It's spelled out. What's driving us is the legislation, Senate Bill 200, which states that a map of aquifers that are at high risk of containing contaminants that exceed safe drinking water standards and that are used as a source of drinking water for the state small water system or a domestic well. And that, so this map is to be prepared annually and is to be updated annually. And also the very first line there, by January 1st, 2021. So I'm going to show you a timeline of where we are in that process. The other requirement that is spelled out in SB 200 is that this aquifer risk map that we're going to show you the draft this morning is to be publicly accessible on the internet website. So those really, in a nutshell, is what drives this project, is producing the map, making it publicly available, and updating it every year. So here's our timeline. I don't know how many people out there have attended our previous webinars, but we held, this is the third of 3 that we intend to put on in 2020. We're here on October 9th, webinar 3, where we are going to present the draft map that we've been compiling based on comments received from the previous workshops. We are very interested in feedback throughout this process, and we've received some excellent feedback, both from the webinars and from other targeted outreach. But in order, you see the January 1st, 2021 deadline that's sort of driving this now. We are figuring that comments for the map to be produced this year will need to come into us by November 1st in order to give us time to seriously consider and potentially incorporate those comments for this first iteration of the map. But we still are interested in any and all comments, because even if we can't or have difficulty incorporating the comment for this year, we're going to be on a continuous development of the map as new data and new data analysis methods and other comments come in from the first map. So this is the first phase of the map for January 1st, 2021. The other important date on this chart is that we have scheduled an informational item to our board. That will be another public forum where we will present the map potentially modified from the one you see this morning at our board meeting on November 4th. Next slide. So our goals in interpreting SB 200 and working with the collaborators and getting feedback that we've received, we've developed these goals. It's prepare a map depicting the relative risk of ambient source groundwater containing chemical constituents at concentrations above regulatory levels. And to do that is a great deal of analysis of existing groundwater quality data. The map is to focus on shallow groundwater that is likely to be accessed by domestic wells and state small systems. And that's an important step. And Emily will touch on that, and we could get into greater detail on that step if there are questions about that. And then we also wanted this map as we've been talking to the other folks working on similar issues and projects in the state, we want this map to be as able to integrate with the other similar efforts that are going on. And because of GIS technology, it's facilitated this a lot, where we can exchange files and check and see how our map shapes up with other similar maps. Most importantly, again, the Department of Water Resources really has done a lot of work with potential drought threat to domestic wells. And we want to make sure that our water quality map can integrate with the DWR, Department of Water Resources, drought risk map, so that the Division of Financial Assistance and the public can have the tools at the fingertips to do effective risk assessment. So I have just 2 more slides to present before I turn it over to Emily. I don't, some of you may have been familiar with the needs assessment that was completed and is still being worked on. In 2018, a project was launched to do a one-time assessment of the potential cost, the needs that are out there in order to provide safe and affordable drinking water for Californians. And again, our role in that assessment was to focus on the shallow groundwater and the domestic wells. And we developed a lot of the tools that we have in the current map during that needs assessment. And we provided, similar to what we're doing with the Aquifer Risk Map, we developed the database and we provided that as information and technical data to the needs assessment team, and they're incorporating that in their one-time needs assessment work. That needs assessment analysis ended up being the basis for the sort of a first iteration of an aquifer risk map. You can advance the slide. That ended up in the 2020 fund expenditure plan. So if you look at the 2020 fund expenditure plan, you will see this map, which is sort of a first cut at an aquifer risk map. You can see the Groundwater Sustainability Agency's priority basins and Central Valley CV salts priority basins highlighted there, and the percentile rankings of relative risk. So that was a sort of a one-time map that was put together for the purpose of completing the 2020 fund expenditure plan that was based on the needs assessment. And after that was produced, we pivoted over to focusing on the aquifer risk map, the every year updated aquifer risk map that we're going to present this morning. So with that, I will turn it over to Emily Houlihan, who's been doing the lion's share of the data analysis work, and she'll walk us through the methodology, and then we can move to item 3 of the agenda, which is question and answer. So take it away, Emily Houlihan.
Thank you, Scott. So I'm going to present just a semi-brief overview of the methodology and the data that went into this aquifer risk map. And I'm also going to show you the draft map itself. It's currently available as a GIS web tool. Hopefully some of you have already checked out the link, but I will be just doing a short demonstration of that, and then we'll move to the Q&A portion. So before I get into the methodology, I just want to reemphasize something that Scott said earlier, which is that there really is a lack of good water quality data for domestic wells and state small systems. So a lot of the decisions that we made in shaping this methodology is guided by the fact that we're working with not a lot of data. So just keep that in mind. So at the highest level, the methodology basically takes point water quality data from wells that represent water that may be accessed by domestic wells and state small systems. We decluster that water quality data into square mile sections, and then we aggregate those square mile section data for all constituents with an MCL into census block group water risk scores. We chose to use census block groups as the final step of aggregation here, mostly for future compatibility with other risk tools, such as the Department of Water Resources drought assessment tool for rural communities, but also for demographic information, such as disadvantaged community status and others. So even though this is an aquifer risk map, we are doing the final aggregation step at census block groups for the reasons I just mentioned. So I'm just briefly going to give a little bit more detail about each of these 3 steps here. So the data processing and data collection steps is very close to the methodology that we used in creating the domestic well water quality tool for the domestic well needs assessment. There are a couple key differences, which I'll point out, but I'll just briefly go over the whole methodology here. So all of the water quality data that we used is publicly available on Gamma GIS. We used water quality data from a variety of different sources that have data from both public and domestic wells. The key item here is that we filtered these wells to identify those that best represented the water quality accessed by domestic wells and state small systems. We did this by collecting well completion data from the online system for well completion records from the Department of Water Resources, and we compared the depths of public and domestic wells in different areas of the state. And in areas where domestic wells and public wells access the same depth of water, we used public wells as a proxy or a stand-in for domestic well water quality data. Again, this is really useful because we don't have a lot of data directly from domestic wells or state small systems. So in order to get good data coverage across the state, we used appropriate depth public wells to stand in for that. I'm not going to go too much into detail of all the methodology steps. We do have a few papers that go into detail about exactly what we did to clean up the data and exactly what years we used and such. Those are available linked in the WebTools splash page. So the last step is that we declustered this point data into square mile sections to account for differences in temporal and spatial sampling distribution. We looked at 2 main metrics for water quality data. We calculated both a long-term average, so the average of all results within the last 20 years, and we also looked at all recent results within the last 2 years. We did this analysis for all chemical constituents with a maximum contaminant level, in addition to a few extras, such as hexavalent chromium. Specifically for hexavalent chromium, I just want to note that we used a comparison concentration value of 10 parts per billion. So we calculated these 2 metrics, long-term average and recent results, for all square mile sections in California that contain a well with water quality data, and for all square mile sections that are adjacent to a well with water quality data. This is a little bit different from the methodology we used for our needs assessment, which estimated water quality for all square mile sections in California. However, since in the aquifer risk map, we have the final step of aggregating by census block group, we did not take the final step of estimating water quality for all square mile sections. We just kept it close to the source well to best represent the water quality in that area. So this is just a quick schematic diagram that shows how we spatially declustered water quality data to sections that contain a well with water quality data and sections adjacent to a well with water quality data. The diagram on the left shows just an example of some locations of wells shown by the blue dots and the various sections that contain and surround those data points. The tables on the right show on the top, explained in words, how we calculated the 2 metrics for each of these types of sections, and on the bottom is a numeric example. So to calculate long-term average, For sections with the water quality well, we simply averaged the results for all wells in that section. For sections adjacent to a water quality well, we took the average of the adjacent sections, this adjacent section averages. For recent results, for sections with the water quality well, we looked at all recent results from all wells in that section. For recent results in sections adjacent to a water quality well, we averaged the count of recent results from adjacent sections. And I apologize if this is a little bit confusing. I'm just going to walk through a quick numeric example to show you. So looking at section F does not contain water quality data, but it's adjacent to two sections that do. Therefore, the long-term average of section F is represented by the average of the long-term average for sections E and I. Additionally, the count of recent results for section F is the average of the count of recent results for section E and the count of recent results for section I. Again, please feel free to ask any questions about this if this is confusing, and look at this on your own to understand it a bit better. So before I look at the final aquifer risk map, I'm just going to show you a brief example that shows how our declustered section data compares with some existing estimations of water quality in the Central Valley. This comparison is specifically showing some estimations for nitrate concentrations in the Central Valley. The image on the left shows the estimations from the CV Salt's upper zone ambient groundwater quality estimations. The image in the middle shows the results from a 2018 by Catherine Ransom and others that uses machine learning to estimate nitrate concentrations. And the image on the right shows our declustered section data for nitrate only. So this is just to show, I know these all have different color schemes, but just to show that they do all roughly call out the same areas as being at risk for high concentrations of nitrate. We did do some more numeric comparisons that confirmed that all three methods basically do roughly estimate the same area as being at risk for nitrate, with slight variations between each method. So now I'll explain how we took the declustered section data and calculated the water quality risk scores for each census block group. So we used 5 different risk factors to assess water quality for each census block group. The first 2 risk factors look at the number of chemicals that are either over the MCL or within 80% to 100% of the MCL. In our assessment, more chemicals above or close to the MCL contributes to a higher overall risk. The third risk factor looks at the average magnitude of results above the MCL. So whether an area has water quality 1, 2, 5, or 10 times above the MCL. In our assessment, higher magnitude indicates higher overall risk. The last 2 risk factors deal with the percent area where constituents might be over the MCL or close to the MCL. And again, in this assessment, more area at risk indicates higher overall risk. So we take these 5 risk factors and combine them into a final water quality score using the following equation. So this equation basically gives a little bit less weight to chemical constituents that are only within 80% to 100% of the MCL. As you can see, risk factors 2 and 5 are both divided by 2 before they're entered into the equation. Additionally, the third risk factor, the average magnitude of results above the MCL, is divided by 10, And this is to account for the fact that there are certain constituents that have very, very high concentrations when they're detected, specifically 1,2,3-trichloropropane, which can often have detections in wells up to 10 or even 100 times the MCL. So if you don't reduce the weight of that risk factor, the final map basically just shows trichloropropane risk. So this shows how we find the final water quality score. And the final water quality score, higher means more risk, but the numbers are not very intuitive, and it doesn't mean, the number itself doesn't mean a lot. And so we convert the final risk scores into percentiles to normalize them across all census block groups. So the final value that you get is a relative risk ranking. So I'm going to show you an example of how this works and how the equation works with some actual examples. So this is showing a screenshot of the tool with two census block groups specifically highlighted, one in the southern Central Valley and one in the upland portion, both in Tulare County. So the first census block group is the one that's highlighted in red here. It's the smaller one. And that one you can see is the middle column in this table. And it was in the 96th percentile for water quality risk. In this map, higher numbers mean more risk. So to be in the 96th percentile indicates quite a high risk to water quality. This table just breaks down the different factors that contributed to that very high risk score. So you can see that there were 7 chemicals above the MCL, 5 chemicals close to the MCL. The average magnitude of results was 2 times the MCL, and about 83% of sections in the block group contained chemicals either above or close to the MCL. This table also breaks down the individual chemical constituents that contributed to the risk score, as well as some metadata about how much data coverage we had. All of this data is available in the final Aquifer Risk Map tool as well. But here I'm just showing how the actual scores are calculated. So in contrast, the second census block group, shown in blue here, is a much larger census block group, and it is only based on our calculations in the 2nd percentile for water quality risk, which is much lower. However, I just want to point out here that that doesn't mean that there's no risk. In fact, there are a couple chemical constituents above and close to the MCL, and the average MCL magnitude is 1.3 times the MCL. So I think it's just important to note that even if an area receives a low relative risk score, it certainly doesn't mean the risk is nothing in a certain area. And later when I show the map, I'll explain how you can use some of the map layers to focus in on where exactly the highest risk might be, especially in a large census block group like this. So I'll just explain briefly what goes into the web tool risk map, and then I'll show the map itself. So the map contains not only the water quality risk percentile layer that contains the water quality data, but also contains a layer with reference boundaries. So you can see regional board boundaries, CV salts basins, and groundwater sustainability agencies, which might be useful for future users of the map. Additionally, we call out where people might be accessing or how people might be accessing the water. So we show the outlines of public water systems, the approximate locations of state small water systems, and the density of domestic wells. The domestic well density data comes from the Department of Water Resources online system for well completion records. But we isolate by domestic well identified records only. One final aspect of the map is that we also include layers that show the declustered water quality data for individual chemicals. We only show this for 5 common constituents, but if you're only interested in a specific chemical, we also call those out. The aggregated map with the census block group scores accounts for water quality risk across all constituents with an MCL plus hexavalent chromium. Additionally, for the layer that looks at the water quality data, we not only include the final census block group scores along with all the metadata, but also the well point data that we used and the declustered square mile section data. So now I'll go to the map and just show you how you can navigate it and some of the different layers that are available. Okay, so this should be the screen that you first see when you get to the map. I just want to point out that the splash page contains links to 2 papers that outline the detailed methodology about the data collection, data processing, and aggregation steps. So those are available at the bottom of the splash screen here. So again, the map is presented as a GIS web tool, which allows users to zoom in, click on different areas, see metadata behind the results, and also toggle which layers they want to view. So I'll use this opportunity to zoom into the 2 census block groups that I was showing earlier and show how you can turn off the aggregated census block group scores and look at the underlying well data to hopefully get a little bit more information. So I'll just turn on the census block group outline so we can see. And again, if you click on an individual census block group area, you can see the risk score for that area and all of the risk factors and metadata that I showed in the PowerPoint slide table. Just a note here, the colors on the map, if you open the layers in the layer tool, you can see what the color scheme indicates. But in this map, red and warmer colors indicate a higher water quality risk, and blue and cooler colors indicate a lower relative water quality risk. So for these 2 census block groups that I was showing, I was explaining how even though this census block group has a low overall water quality risk score, it's not 0. And you can turn on, if we turn off the water quality percentile scores by census block groups, we can turn on the section data. So this is the declustered section data for all constituents. And we can also turn on the well data for all constituents. So this just gives a better idea of exactly where we were getting the data from, what areas of census block groups might be underrepresented by data, and which specific areas of census block groups might be at highest risk. So just to call out this example, even though the census block group has a low overall risk score, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but this bottom left corner in the southwest portion of the census block group likely has a higher risk factor because there are several adjacent wells that contain chemical constituents above or close to the MCL, which is represented by the red color on the wells and in these square mile sections. So I'll just briefly show the data in some of the other layers. So again, in addition to the well data, the section data, and the census block group data, we also include the drinking water supply systems. So that can be found in this layer right here. So the default is to show small water systems, and this shows the approximate locations of small water systems as mapped by Rcac. You can also show the locations of public water systems. and the density of domestic well users. Again, this is just from the Oscar data set. One thing I'll mention right after I show this map is how we're looking at integrating the density of domestic well users and state small systems into our calculated risk factors, but I'll mention that a little bit later. So for right now, we just have the locations of domestic well and state small users overlain with the water quality risk, so you can compare them together. So now I'll navigate back to the PowerPoint and just finish up.
So while Emily's transitioning, you know, please feel free to click on that link and navigate around the map as a way to learn more about it. And maybe that will foster some additional comments or questions for us in the coming weeks.
I'm sorry, I'm having a bit of a problem sharing my screen. Hang on one second. Oh, all right, there we go. Okay. So there's just a couple final things that I want to call out, and then I have a couple of things that are proposed proposals that we're thinking about adding to the map, but obviously are not in the web tool currently. So the first issue is just this area, this issue of lack of data. So this is called out in the map by those hash marks that you see, and that just identifies area where we have especially low water quality data density. So either no water quality results or less than 10% of the area has water quality data. Again, this is a problem because in the equation that we use to calculate water quality risk, areas with low data density sort of effectively get much lower risk scores just because of how we set up the equation. So we didn't want to, we just wanted to highlight that these areas, you might want to be careful when interpreting results from them because they don't have great data coverage. We're looking at ways to improve the data coverage in the future, but if anybody has suggestions on that, that's definitely something we're open to. So the final thing I'm going to talk about is just the integration of that aspect of exposure, the density of domestic well and state small user population as an additional risk factor in creating the final map. So here is just a schematic that shows how those additional risk factors might fit into our current breakdown of risk factors. So on the left is the 5 original factors that I explained earlier that all contribute to water quality risk. And on the right is 2 proposed new risk factors that capture who might actually be using the water and how many people might be using the water. So again, this would basically say that if more people are accessing the water, that area might be at higher risk if the water quality is high. So in this scenario, we have looked at the count of domestic wells and the count of state small water systems, calculated the density of state small water system and domestic well users per census block group, and incorporated that as an equal weighted risk factor. So this diagram or this image just shows how that might look. So the image on the left here is the current web tool risk map that just shows water quality risk. So the colors there, the red shows the areas that are at highest risk for water quality issues. The map in the middle shows the density of domestic wells and state small water systems by census block groups. The red areas in the middle map show the areas where the most people per square mile are accessing groundwater via domestic wells or state small water systems. The map on the right shows what you get if you combine additively those 2 risk factors, giving equal weight to both. Again, the key terms here are that I added the 2 risk factors, not multiplied them, and I gave equal weight to both the hazard, the water quality risk, and the exposure, the density of domestic wells and state small water systems. So this is something that we're considering adding, and this is just an example to show you what it might look like. And with that, I'll turn it over to Itze to start the Q&A portion.
Thank you. All right, so quickly I want to thank our panelists for that thorough overview. And as Emily just stated, we are going to move forward into our public comment and discussion period for today's event. So this slide is back up to just remind attendees that there are various ways in which you can participate. So what we are going to start doing is there have been quite a few questions submitted to the Q&A feature that I introduced earlier today. So we'll go through those and then we'll follow up by any submissions that have been sent through the Safer email box. And then we will hold space for those that would like to speak. And when that time comes, I'll provide you instruction on how to raise your virtual hand, whether you are using the webinar of Zoom or you are calling in. So let me open up the Q&A, and remember these can be upvoted, so they are moving around. And I'm going to start off by the very top and then work my way down. So the first question I'm showing is, what was the average depth chosen to filter the water quality results for domestic wells? Would anyone like to answer this question?
I can answer that. This is Emily. So there's not a single response to this. We actually looked at different depths across the state. So we used a unit, the groundwater unit, which is basically basins, but also upland portions of the state. And for every basin, we looked individually for the well completion records in that basin to see what the average domestic well depth was, and also compare the depth of domestic wells and public wells in that basin specifically. We didn't do a single statewide number because we know that the depth of public wells and domestic wells varies across the state. So we didn't want to just put in a single numeric cutoff and eliminate wells in the Central Valley, for example, but include wells in upland portions. That might be incorrect. I believe that the exact numeric values are included in one of the white papers, but I will double check on that and follow up.
Perfect. Thank you. So we do have another question that has come in, and it indicates what kind of data on small water systems is available in Rcac?
Yeah, this is Scott Seifert. I can address that, maybe not completely, but we have been working with our Division of Drinking Water and I can't remember, sorry, what RCAC, the acronym is for, the rural. They've done a great deal of work surveying counties and getting as much information as is available on state small systems. And right now, what we have in the tool is XY, locational data for the state small systems. Some of them have provided some water quality data, but it's not, consistent, and that's under development. And that's part of SB 200, is to really, in the future, get water quality data that is available for those systems. But at this point, what we've received from RCAC, we've incorporated, and they are locations. And frankly, it's one spot. It could be the administrative address for that state small system, or the location of a well that's involved in that system. So that's where we are right now.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So the next question that populates is, do you feel scoring systems might be biased against large rural census blocks? It would seem those larger areas would be more likely to have a higher count of chemicals, even if there may be a broad areas of high quality groundwater.
Yeah, I can tackle this one. This is Emily, but others feel free to jump in as well. I do definitely think that the current assessment, as we have set it up, does underrepresent potentially the risk of large rural census block groups mostly because of the fact that for those areas, we tend to have less data coverage. And so it's built in that if you have less data coverage, you're probably going to get a lower risk score. It of course does not mean that there aren't problems in those areas. And I would say that the way that we have tried to counter this is mostly by providing the data by section, so that even if the census block group risk score maybe doesn't exactly capture the true risk of the area, you can look at the individual well and section data and get a better sense of where problems might be in the large census block groups and the true sense of the risk. But I would agree that currently we maybe underrepresent the risk of rural census block groups.
Thank you, Emily. We do have another question that has been upvoted. It does indicate the map doesn't seem to show risk at or near large regional contaminated sites. Is there a data set not included? I noticed Aerojet, Sacramento County, and Beale, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing, AFB, Yuba County, at first glance.
Yeah, this is Scott Seifert. I can answer that. And for this iteration of the map, we, in the vast world of the groundwater data sets, we did not include groundwater monitoring wells from cleanup sites as a first cut here, because the nature of those wells and how they're screened and their purpose doesn't feed directly into the goal of characterizing domestic well depth water quality. However, like these two big sites that you mentioned may be exceptions to that, as many of those monitoring wells are screened at depths that do represent potential, the depth of potential domestic wells in the area. So our answer is, in the future, we're going to be integrating those data by depth filter. But for this first cut, we have filtered the data to not include cleanup monitoring well data at this first stage. But that's a very good point.
Great, thank you. So we have another question that indicates, what was the average depth chosen to filter the water quality results for domestic wells?
I think we might have already had this question.
Okay, let me just go ahead and make sure that it gets moved. Thank you. Here we go. While census block groups allow demographic comparison in rural areas, the census blocks are much larger than sections suggested that you published a map with sections data too.
So
suggest that you publish a map with section data too. Okay.
Yeah, and I think Emily demonstrated that that is in the tool. And also we are in close communication with our Division of Financial Assistance and letting them know what a big blue rural area looks like and why you need to look at that section and well data if you're really looking at going into an area to do some work.
Great, thank you. I do have, could you please explain again excuse me, that was then moved. Many tribes do not have their well depth and water quality results on file with DWR. Have these aquifer risk maps incorporated data from US EPA to get tribal data included?
This is Scott Seifert. At this point, we do not have a data set on that incorporated. So if there are such data available that we could integrate, we would be very interested in getting that and incorporating it into this evaluation.
Okay, great. All right, we have quite a bit of questions coming through. So here we have another question that states, When you used public well chemistry as a proxy for domestic well quality, you chose it based on similar depth. Can you quantitatively define similar? Thank you.
Yes, this is Emily. So I'm going to attempt to do this without my slides. I didn't include the depth filter slides in this presentation. So what we did for each basin to assess, to create the depth filter for each basin, we looked at all of the domestic well depths on Oscar and all of the public well depths on Oscar for that basin. We then calculated an average domestic well depth and an average public well depth. If the domestic well depth was deeper, the same, or within 10% of the public well depth, we said that domestic and public well depths were similar. So I'll just repeat that briefly because there's a lot of words that are similar. So if the average domestic well depth in a basin was deeper or the same or within 10% of the public well, the average public well depth, we then characterized public well and domestic well depths as similar. So hopefully that helps. I know that that's sometimes hard. I think for future iterations of the white papers, I think the needs assessment white paper has a diagram that explains this, but I'll add that diagram to the Aquifer risk map white paper as well, because I understand it's hard to visualize without looking at a diagram, at least for me.
Thank you. So we have one commenter that has not submitted a question, but they do want to tell the presenters that this presentation has been well done. So good job. And we do have a request. What contaminant is, and please forgive me, Picate, P-C-A-T-E. Scott or Emily?
I might be perchlorate. Is that, I guess that's what's showing up on the risk map legend.
Yeah, so I can tell you where to find the list that both shows the total list of contaminants we used and their full non-acronym names. So on the splash page of the web tool, if you click on the Aquifer Risk Map methodology paper and scroll to the end, there's a complete table that shows the full name of each chemical, the comparison concentration value that we used, which hopefully should answer that question.
Perfect. I'm just typing in just so that way it can be used for later reference. Okay.
Yeah, is there a way maybe, sorry, to add the link to the map again in or sorry, never mind. Sorry.
We can also route that at the end of the event. Okay. So then again, it does, there is a question. Can you provide the website where the detailed methodology is available again? And I believe that's what you have explained.
Yes, so yeah, I can't link it now when I'm sharing my screen, but just the splash page of the web tool, right when you first open the web tool, if you scroll down the splash screen, there's 2 links at the bottom, and those contain the detailed methodology.
Okay. Perfect. All right. On slide 17, what is considered long-term?
Let me just go back to slide 17 just so I can make sure that's okay. Yeah, so here long-term means all results within the last 20 years. So for this specific iteration of the map, I downloaded the data in August, and so it was everything 20 years previous to August 2020.
Thank you. We have a question that indicates, I might have missed it. Is there an easy way to export the attribute table data for all regions after the layers of interest have been turned on in the live map?
So at this point in time, this is Emily. I don't believe there is, but we can definitely look into adding that as a usable
Feature?
export tool on the GIS tool. That's a good input.
Okay, great. Perfect. Is information from this program being shared with DWR's effort to update the state's well standards, particularly related to minimum seal depths, and how that could be informed by your analysis of how water quality varies with depth?
Yeah, this is Scott. I'll address that, and it's just an excellent question. Not formally at this point, DWR and DWQ are coordinating on the development of the well standards. DWR has reached out to the Division of Water Quality and specifically the Gamma Group to sit on the technical advisory committee and be involved in that whole process. So that's just a great point. And yes, we are taking this information about water quality and we'll be bringing it with us as we work with DWR in that whole process. So yes.
Okay, perfect. One moment. I apologize to the submitter of this question. I believe there was a question in regards to the declustering methods question. Give me one moment. It indicates, could you please explain again the method declustering to go from point data from wells to square mile sections? The submitter indicates that this question has not yet been answered.
Sure. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry for not answering that question. So we're already on the slide that shows that. So I'll just walk through it once again here. So we have slightly different declustering methodologies for calculating the long-term average and for calculating the recent result count. So I'll walk through the long-term average first, and I'll do it for a section with water quality data wells, for wells with water quality. So just to show an example, section E, in this example, section E has 2 wells with water quality data. The point data from each of these wells is first averaged by year and then by well. So each well gets an average for the long-term value. Then those well averages are averaged together to get the section average. Then the section averages for source sections, E and I here, are then averaged to adjacent sections to give the adjacent sections their long-term average. I apologize for saying the word average so much. So hopefully that clarifies a little bit how we did the declustering for the long-term average. Well results are first averaged by year, then by well, then by section, then they're applied to neighboring sections if appropriate. And we do that for each individual constituent. So it's not until the census block group aggregation step that constituents are mixed. For the recent results, it's a little bit more straightforward. The declustering basically just takes all of the data within each square mile section. So for this example, section E, we would just look at all of the results within the past 2 years for the wells within section E, and you just provide a count of how many of those recent results are above the MCL, how many are close to the MCL, and how many are below the MCL. Then those counts are applied to neighboring sections as appropriate. Hopefully that covers it. I do understand this is a little bit complicated, so feel free to follow up with additional questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Emily. So I have noted it for us to circle back, but it does indicate Sacramento Valley Water Quality Coalition would like to assist with filling data gap areas. So I've gone ahead and saved that. Thank you so much. Let's see. Another question, how was data quality assessed for the groundwater data? Was all data used or were some data filtered out due to the elevated MDLs or other factors?
Yeah, this is Emily, so I'll take this. So yes, we did do a lot of data processing on the data that we downloaded from the Gamma GIS website. So the first thing that we did was, just as you point out, we dealt with different reporting limits or different maximum detection limits. And the data processing that we did there, again, it's covered in detail in the needs assessment white paper, but just to briefly explain here, we basically, to incorporate non-detect results into the long-term average, we had to apply a numeric value for those non-detect results. And so we had a methodology that basically took the reporting limit divided by the square root of 2 and used that as a numeric stand-in for non-detection results. One of the other data processing steps we did was to filter out outliers. So for each chemical constituent, we calculated basically, I'm sorry, I'm blanking a little bit. An average and a standard deviation for the distribution of concentrations for each chemical constituent, and individual results that were more than 10 standard deviations away from the mean were eliminated and considered outliers. This is to account for potentially values that have been misentered into the data system. And we went through and manually checked to make sure our cutoff was true and wasn't cutting off potentially real data, but there were values such as thousands and thousands of milligrams per liter for chemical constituents that should not have that. So the data processing step involved a little bit of adjusting of non-detects and elimination of outliers. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Emily. Another question is submitted and asks, will regional board staff be able to download the shape files and metadata for selected geographic areas?
We can definitely look into that. I know there are some limitations with how much data we can put on the web tool, just in terms of slowing it down. But yeah, definitely making the regional data at least downloadable, that is a good thing to look into. We will definitely look into that.
Perfect, thank you. How do you account for temporal variations in the long-term data? Were any years weighted considered there were fewer wells 20 years ago than today?
So all of the years when calculating the 20-year long-term average, they were all weighted similarly. And the way that we dealt with balancing the need to capture both long-term average data, but also recent data, is instead of weighting years differently, we added that second metric that captures the count of recent results above the MCL. And we used that to balance out the fact that you might have more data within the last couple years. But no, we did not specifically weight the years when we calculated long-term average. Each year is weighted equally.
Thank you. Can you go into more detail why you divide the average MCL index by 10? I understand that 1, 2, 3 TCP has a high concentration and will distort the results, but why not just divide this concentration by 10?
That is a great question. And if anybody here has a suggestion for different ways to do it, I'd be very interested in hearing that. This is mostly a product of the fact that when I first made the map, I did not weight this risk factor, and it was quite obviously a map of 1, 2, 3 TCP distribution. And so I adjusted the map until that was not as prominent. So again, yeah, if people have other suggestions for how to do this, I didn't want to treat individual chemical constituents differently. So I didn't want to apply like a handicap for 123 TCP because it is real data, and I didn't want to treat constituents differently. So this was sort of a compromise, but definitely something that very open to changing this in the future if people have other ideas.
Okay, perfect. So looks like that will be considered. Thank you. Where can we see the list of 96 contaminants used to calculate the score?
Yeah, so the 96 contaminants, along with the comparison concentration values we used, are available at the end of the Aquifer risk map sort of white paper notes that's available on the splash screen.
Thank you. Another submission indicates I have used the Gamma database focus on number 3 and EC. What are the pros and cons of Gamma versus Safer, and what could I possibly learn in addition to what I have learned using Gamma?
I'll jump in here just to give Emily a break. So the Gamma database is, the goal there is to be, very comprehensive, to harvest all the available data and integrate it into one functional database. It's a lot of work and it's a big challenge, and we certainly appreciate the other commenter that said they'd like to coordinate and help. That's exactly what our core mission is. The differences, so if you go from, let's say, Gamma to Safer, Gamma is there to tell the public and inform the public on the ambient groundwater quality condition, just what is out there. Safer is then taking that groundwater quality data and portraying what water systems are serving to the public. So there's that treatment step. And that's where there's the line in the sand. We take effort to filter our data so that it represents what's out in the ground and not what has been potentially treated. Safer is focusing on what is being served.
All right, thank you. So we do have just a suggestion in the Q&A. It says for well water analysis in Mendo County, contact Alpha Labs. So I'll go ahead and ensure that that's saved. Thank you. Is there data available about wells going dry, the cause of wells going dry, and the source of pollution? To achieve the goals of safer and human right to water, we need this information. Otherwise, we cannot stop polluters and large groundwater users who are drying up their neighbors' domestic wells.
Yeah, that's a great comment. And one thing we're doing to address that concern is, as we've mentioned, incorporate, maybe just as a data layer for now, the Department of Water Resources drought risk information that portrays where domestic wells, by virtue of their depth, and yes, by virtue of surrounding groundwater stresses and uses, are at most risk for drought. As far as pollution sources, that information is available on GeoTracker. You can see where contaminant plumes are, and the information is out there. We are always interested in, the public experience of that data and how we can make it more useful and available.
Thank you. All right. Continuing on, we have 17 questions still in the Q&A. Let's continue. The next question, I'm curious what software you use to perform the analysis, such as declustering, averaging, Python. Will the code be made available to the public along with the results?
So this is Emily, I can answer this one. So yeah, I used R to do all of the data analysis in this, plus a little bit of GIS, obviously at the end. And I think definitely the code can be made available along with the results. We're very interested in being super transparent about how all the steps have done, and that's a great suggestion. And yeah, I think we can definitely do that.
Thank you. All right. Does your data set take into account whether a domestic well is still actively used? Is there a data set that shows if a well is not used anymore?
So that's a great question, and this is an area that is going to be improved on in the future. At this point, um, we're using what we kind of raw data from the DWR online Oscar database, and that has the categories of domestic, monitoring, irrigation, and at this point we're just capturing domestic category. There have been efforts in some studies on what's the average life of a well, so that if a well is 100 years old, should you assume that it is not active? And we are definitely tracking that and looking at it, and it's just certainly an area that needs improvement and is being worked on.
Thank you. What are the differences between the Gamma Drinking Water Quality Tool and the ARM ARM? Do they have different purposes?
Hi, this is John Borkovich. I'd like to take a hack at that. Everybody, welcome. And I wanted to thank the folks that are in attendance today. I'm the Groundwater Monitoring Section Chief. So the Gamma unit that's been doing all this hard work, our program with Scott and Emily, they're doing all the heavy lifting. But I figured I'd give it a shot of answering that question, because I think what I'm reading there is somewhat similar to a previous question that Scott answered related to our groundwater ambient monitoring and assessment groundwater information system, or Gamma GIS. And as the way Scott described it, it is basically a gathering point, if you will, of a tremendous amount of data that's aggregated together across multiple data sets for millions of pieces of data. And so the way that the data are represented in that system are shown on a Google Maps interface. And so you can basically adjust temporally in you can look at it over time. You can look at it for shorter time periods. You can look at it by chemical. You can adjust the way in which what wells you're pulling from in the system, et cetera. So there is a way in which to manipulate the data that you're looking at in that system. The ARM, or the Aquifer Risk Map, that's being developed by our team is different. And I would, as Scott described, it's more of an emphasis on what people are drinking out there. However, with respect to domestic well users and perhaps even state smalls out there, there's not a lot of data out there to support that there's a lot of groundwater treatment, because the bulk of the water that's being used here by those entities is from the ground. And so with that information, we can, it's safe to assume, at least at this point, that the vast majority of those sources of water for people, domestic well users as well as state smalls, are untreated. So it basically goes from there, and the analysis that Emily has gone into great detail today is looking at that, scrutinizing it, filtering it, and providing it in a fashion to winnow it down into different geographic portrayals, if you will, with respect to potential risk. So they are different. However, what's being used to inform the ARM, or the Aquifer Risk Map, is pulling from that data system.
Thank you, John. All right, we still have about 17 Q&A questions. So what we are going to do now is Our subject matter experts, which were the panelists today, are going to go through the questions that can be answered. There is an option to type the answer directly into the Q&A. So you will receive your answer directly from the panelists, because we would like to provide the opportunity for those that have joined us through webcast and are actually emailing in their questions to actually also have their questions answered. So give me one moment while we pull up those questions. And then as a reminder, your Q&A questions will still be answered. They will be answered directly from the panelist. 1 minute. All right. So moving on to emailed questions, we have question number 1 from Nicole Sward. Managing member Snug Harbor Resorts, LLC. One of the missing public drinking water systems of the North Delta. Dear Waterboard, please correct your safer draft map to show the public drinking water systems located in the Delta region. I reviewed the map and it appears to omit most, excuse me, this is moving up as they're being submitted, most of the small water systems, private drinking water wells, and public drinking water systems of the Delta region, and all of us are at risk for contamination due to the changes to groundwater. Please also add a slider bar to the map to make the blocks less opaque so that people can better recognize the locations referenced. It would be quite helpful to provide the location of the report data that verifies the specific blocked area water quality designations as well. Thank you so much for that comment.
Yeah,
We have
great comments. That's why we're doing this. This is
perfect. Yes, I was just about to say.
exactly.
All right, we do have question number 2 has come in. It indicates that it's from Madeline Glickfield, series of related questions. So, is there a reason why SB 200 requires an annual update of the map? That's question number 1. Question number 2, is this a function of adding new data from testing every year? And then question number 3, as a scientist, do you expect significant changes in the map from year to year with risk levels changing each year?
Well, I believe the intention for annual updates is just recognizing that we are going to be, this is the start of this program essentially, and we're going to be getting a great deal of data coming in. There are large data gaps in the population of domestic wells and their depth and their age. We've talked about those hatched areas with low densities of data and strategies for filling that in, and that will change. It's difficult to speculate to what extent the map will change. I mean, this mapping effort, like Emily showed in the Central Valley slides, has affirmed other risk assessments and shown areas that are pretty well recognized to be a higher priority risk profile. And it's hard to imagine that those would change. But the annual update, it just recognizes that more data is going to be coming in, and it's a great direction to go.
Perfect, thank you. We do have another submission. This is submitted by Ana Lucia Garcia Briones, manager of California Groundwater Program Environmental Defense Fund. Question number 1, is there an Excel spreadsheet or other database of identified domestic wells and state small water systems at risk that appear on the map? For example, is there a list of the point data?
So there is not an Excel spreadsheet now, but I think a previous commenter also asked if the attribute values could be available in downloadable format. And so we'll look into that. And if that is available for us via the web tool, then yes, there would be like a spreadsheet of all of the map data. Basically, you could see the map data in tabular format.
Perfect. Thank you, Emily. Anna did provide 3 additional questions. Her second question is, what is the average depth of a shallow well? Followed by, what other map tools exist that are similar to this one? And then her final question, the dotted line of the reference boundary does not align with the boundaries in the base layer map. I think they might be projected in different coordinate systems.
So I'll try to go through these kind of quickly. I don't know that we have a single average depth for a shallow well. Again, we did the depth filter by individual basins. I can say generally off the top of my head, less than 300 feet in most basins would qualify as domestic well cutoff. I am aware that the boundaries don't exactly match up, and I'll look into that before the final map version is released. And the other map tool off the top of my head that I know is similar is the Department of Water Resources, the drought risk assessment that categorizes drought risk to rural communities that are relying on domestic wells. But there's also a variety of tools from OEHA and Community Water System that also categorize water quality risk.
Thank you. All right, so we do have another submission, Cynthia McLean, hydrologist, Alberta Environment and Parks. The question is, in the layer where domestic wells are visible, are these exact locations or are they shifted to protect the well owner's privacy?
So on the map, we don't show point locations of domestic wells, just the density of domestic wells per square mile from Oscar. So no, we don't show the exact locations of domestic wells. Just, I will note that on the layer that shows the water quality data, so not the drinking water supply system layer, but the water quality layer, if a well is categorized as domestic and included there, it's okay for us to disclose the location. It's already available on Gamma GIS.
Great.
Hopefully that's not too confusing.
Thank you. Another question from Laura Rosenberg Hayter. Her question is, does everyone have access to the at-risk wells map?
So right now it's a draft map, so we don't have a public link like on a website, just because we're still in the process of updating it and don't want anybody to sort of think that this is the final version, but it's definitely free for everybody to look at. Just be aware that this version might change before January, but on January 1st, we'll have a link prominently on the SAFER website and the Gamma website as well to link to the map.
Thank you. We do have another submission by John Goodrich, and it indicates, I remain very concerned that your basin data is overgeneralized. The risk map you offer is important insofar as into adequately separates various aquifers and then relies upon well data from within those aquifers. Perhaps not true in the Great Basin, the Central Valley, but in most other places, basins, unless we're talking about those downstream of all individual basins which feed them, where many wells are located, are aquifers unique to relatively small alluvial deposits or other geologic isolation. In my current property of less than a square mile, there are two entirely separate basins with entirely separate water quality characteristics that bear almost no relation to each other. In examining your risk map of our area, there is no differentiation whatsoever covering several small basins of unique character with a generality which is consequently inaccurate.
That's a really excellent point. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, water quality is can be extremely variable within a short linear distance. I think that because we were tasked with creating a statewide map, there was, we did at some level have to aggregate across areas that are not going to, accurately reflect basin or aquifer boundaries. Again, I think I said this earlier, but for large areas, especially large census block groups, We are really emphasizing that users look at the section and individual well data as the best representation of what might be going on in a specific area. And again, this map, it doesn't definitively say whether an area has chemical constituents over the MCL or not. It just tells you in general what's going on with nearby wells. But of course, the best course of action to determine whether an individual well is at risk is to test that specific well. But yeah, that's an excellent point.
Thank you. All right, the last email submission is quite lengthy, so please bear with me while I read this. It is our final submission through email, and then we can move forward with open Q&A discussion. Jonathan Rash, United States Public Health Service, California Area Indian Health Service. One, I could not find Scott's contact information, so sending this to the general SAFER email address. During the Q&A of today's SAFER Aquifer Risk Methodology presentation, I asked if tribal data on well depth and well water quality was incorporated into the Aquifer Risk Map. The tribal data is often not on file with DWR, but US EPA would typically have access to this information. Scott said that no tribal data was available and he would like to know more about how it could be obtained. I would recommend Emmanuel Rapikovlavi from EPA, I apologize if I mispronounced, Region 7 in San Francisco, CC'd here. We will forward the email. As a good first point of contact, if the Water Board would like to reach out to EPA about their tribal data and possibly incorporate it into the risk map. We have also been working with DWR, CDAG, and their assessment of risk in determining whether to target drought assistance. They have already reached out to federal EPA in their efforts to include tribes. Perhaps some cooperation between your separate programs for tribal outreach and incorporation of tribal data would be a good suggestion. I have also CC Julia Estrom and Nirmala Benin from CDAG as well, if you would like to coordinate with the efforts they are already undertaking on tribal data and outreach. Also, please feel free to reach out to me anytime for assistance. The Indian Health Service works closely with tribes on water systems, both community and domestic wells. We are interested in assisting both the tribes and the states to ensure tribes are on equal footing with other small water systems and rural communities in qualifying for the SAFER assistance. So thank you very much for that suggestion. And we will forward this email from the SAFER box to those that have been identified within this email. So moving forward, Emily, I do know that there are 2 questions or feedback you'd like us to ask. Would you like us to show those slides in order to then open it up to public comment?
Sure, thank you.
Great. So here we have our areas of water quality risk that you are aware of depicted adequately. So it does indicate note a low risk percentile score does not mean there is no water quality risk in the area. Some areas may need to be viewed at the section or well granularity to be better depict water quality conditions. So at this point for this slide, if any attendees would like to raise their hand and provide comment, again, if you are calling in, you can raise your hand by pressing *9 on your cellular device. And we can wait for those hands to be raised in order to allow you to speak. Otherwise, if you feel more comfortable, you can still submit your questions or comments through the QA or email. So we'll allow a few minutes for this slide, and then we do have a second slide, which we ask another question that I know our presenters today would be really interested in obtaining feedback.
I think we already received some feedback on this first question by the commenter that discussed the, and Emily acknowledged the variability of water quality over small scales related to groundwater basin structure and aquifer structure and recharge sources and all that. So
Thank you.
yeah.
All right, if we want to move on to slide number 30. All right, feedback for specifics. Water quality metrics, should additional metrics be used? Should current metrics be removed? And then as far as water quality score calculation, should the metric weighting be changed? Which metric should be given the most weight? And then display and interpretation. Is the map easy to use and understand? Again, if you would like to provide verbal comment, you do have the opportunity to do so. You can either raise your hand virtually or press *9 on your phone. Otherwise, again, we have the Q&A where you can submit your question or concern or answer these questions also via email. Okay, so I don't see any hands raised. I do show that there are 15 questions in the Q&A, but I do understand that those questions will be answered by our panelists. And if any questions trickle in through email that have not been addressed out loud, they will be answered. And we are keeping track of all of the questions that have been submitted through Q&A, through email. So please know that those will be answered. Emily, would you like us to proceed with answering some more Q&As as we currently do not have any other email submissions, or would you like to do that at a later time?
Oh, yeah, I think that'd be good. Maybe briefly before we do that, have been a couple questions about features on the web tool that I'd just like to show users here and hopefully clear up some questions. I was trying to answer them verbally, but I think it's easier to just show. So I'll just take a minute here to share the web map again.
Thank you.
So I saw a couple questions about how to find what the different symbols and colors mean. So when you're looking at the map, if you go over to the layer list that shows all the different layers that you can toggle on and off, if you click on a layer that you're interested in, it'll pop out a little drop-down menu that shows you what exactly the colors mean. And you can do this for any of the layers. So that's how you find that. Additionally, there's a slider feature that allows you to toggle the transparency of specific layers. So if you click on a layer that you're interested in and you go to these 3 dots that are next to the layer title, a menu will pop up that allows you to set the transparency of that layer, which just allows you to maybe a little bit easier view multiple layers at one time or see the underlying base map. So I know there's a question about that, and hopefully this answers it.
Thank you, Emily. All right, well, I just want to thank everyone that has contributed to today's discussion. I'm sure that our panelists will take the feedback and suggestions and incorporate them into any modifications that will be done to the final version of the map. And then before we close up for today's event, we do want to provide some next steps and some announcements. Next slide, Emily. So here we do have some upcoming SAFER events. On October 13th, we do have a cost estimate webinar. October 30th, the finance dashboard will be launched. In November, we have November 20th, a cost estimate webinar. And then entering December, we do have the SAFER Advisory Group meeting on the 10th Advisory Group member meeting, and then the 14th Risk Assessment webinar. Give me one moment. All right. So you know what? Let me go ahead and we have actually been getting a little more questions coming in, and I'm being informed that we can go ahead and start to read some off if we'd like to continue. Emily, if we can put the slide back up that has the different ways in which to participate. Thank you. Okay, great. So just to continue, as we are a little early today, we do have a submitted question. In terms of public water system layer features that are not verified, i.e. shown as red, what exactly is not verified? The exact service area as drawn, number of connections, etc.
So this is Emily. I think I can answer this one, but I apologize if I get it wrong and someone else knows better. We took the public water system layer directly from, I believe it's the CA, the open data portal. And I believe that not verified means that the boundaries are not verified. But someone please correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't think you're wrong. We do have another question. Other than a splash screen, the reference documents can be assessed by clicking the encircled eye on the green ribbon. So thank you for that suggestion. It is just another way in which you can obtain the information. And then can future versions of the aquifer risk map separate anthropogenic contaminants that originate at the land surface like nitrate and geogenic contaminants like gross alpha arsenic?
Yes, I mean, I think that's a great comment. And Emily mentioned one of the longer term project to fill in data gaps for those geogenic compounds is we're partnering with our United States Geological Survey for them to do systematic statistical modeling of those areas to provide a scientifically sound estimate of, say, chromium, uranium, arsenic, based on the soils and geology and water chemistry of the area to fill in those gaps. And it does, that is a very useful distinction between the geogenic and the anthropogenic chemicals. So that's going in, to me, the bin of the phase 2 aquifer risk map kind of effort. But great comment.
Thank you. For the map indicating areas with no or low water quality data density, slide 25, does this indicate that less than 10% of the area had data for a single chemical constituent, or does the 10% cutoff consider multiple constituents? What options are you considering to estimate water quality of these areas?
So I can answer the first part and then I'll pass it to Scott probably. So the less than 10% is any and all constituents that we looked at. It could be multiple constituents adding up to the more than 10%. So it's all constituents that we looked at. If all constituents cover less than 10% of the area, then it was classified as low data density. And I think Scott.
Yeah, and to fill in, I mentioned earlier partnering with USGS to do that in a scientifically sound method. We drew the line for this first iteration on just using existing data, and these comments are excellent. They're bringing up the potential limitation of that approach if we don't have data, obviously. But we did not take the step of attempting to do what would be modeling, saying, well, if there's agriculture use, then we'll give it a certain rating and all that. That's not to say that won't be incorporated in future iterations. But for this first map, we are sticking with the interpretation of the data, the known data conditions. Yeah.
Great, thank you. What is the zone of influence for domestic wells versus public supply well?
That is like the other commenter said about groundwater being so site specific, that the zone of influence of a well is very much individual and site specific. In general terms, those community water system deeper wells will end up having a larger zone of influence or capture a bigger area of groundwater than a shallower domestic well. But you know, that's a good question and something to always be thinking about with these maps. But you know, we did not incorporate an assumed zone of influence in the methodology that was developed.
Thank you. Will there be a funded initiative to collect groundwater data across the state, particularly those areas that have little data? I also had some issues with audio when I first came into the meeting, so I'm sorry if you went over this at the beginning, but where and what agencies are you getting your data from? And will this be included in the novel data? Will this include the novel data? Do you have any data inclusion standards and QA, QC from outside data?
Great questions. Emily's bringing up slide 15 that lists the databases that were used for this. There's several different data sources coming in. And there's a current effort by, again, United States Geological Survey as part of the aquifer assessment. They're going through the state bit by bit and blocking out areas and systematically sampling the domestic depth water quality throughout the state. They've covered about, roughly 20 to 25% of the state, and we're definitely using all that data. And there's a schedule to keep marching through the state and covering these areas. This is a lot about priorities. So their work over the last 5 years or so to characterize domestic well depth has focused on where there's the most wells and where we know there are the highest populations. And as not to say the other areas aren't important, but it was just, you have to start somewhere. And so that data will continue to be generated by the USGS. Otherwise, you can look at the white paper and the slide to see the list of data sources that go into the Gamma Groundwater Information System database.
Perfect. Thank you. Are agricultural wells pollutant data from Gamma in the same census block group included as a risk for the state's small system and domestic wells?
Let's see, agricultural wells. We do, the Gamma database does include groundwater quality data generated from the Department of Water Resources, which does include data that may have been collected from an agricultural well. Typically, those wells are deeper and perhaps wouldn't not make it through the depth filter. But I don't know. We might need to drill into that question a little bit deeper and get back by email about the specifics of, to what extent irrigation well data may be in the mix here.
Perfect. Thank you.
And this is John. So I'd also like to add that if they're referring to the ILRP data, I believe that most of the ILRP data, correct me if I'm wrong, is from most likely domestic wells that are sampled that are adjacent to those areas, but there may be a mixture of data associated with that. So Scott's right, we should do a deeper dive into the data to make sure we get correct answer out to folks.
Thank you, John. Replacing non-detects with arbitrary value might result in bias. This has been shown in the literature. See Statistics for Censored Environmental Data using Minitab and R by Helsel and other publications by Helsel. It might be useful to research other methods as imputation.
Yeah, I can speak to this briefly. So yeah, we are aware of this, and we did look into exploring some of the other ways that we could numerically replace non-detects in the data set. Unfortunately, because of the declustering steps we did, averaging by year, then by well, then by section, it might not be statistically appropriate to do another method such as imputation because of the low number of individual values that get aggregated, that get averaged, and it's hard to carry those more advanced statistical methods through like multiple averaging steps. So we did look into that, and I will continue to look into this, but that's a very good point. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. We have 3 questions. Does the map take into account systems that are in the process of having groundwater issues mitigated through state funding?
So at this point, no. I mean, this is, again, the purpose of the map is to depict the ambient groundwater quality condition, and then you overlay a potential domestic well density and or a potential state small system without considering whether that system has getting treatment or funding. That would be the role that the Division of Financial Assistance would go through in their prioritization.
Thank you. I think some additions that will be useful would be to export data and import your own data to the map. If possible, adding a search data tool through ESRI and other resources to add layers would make this tool very useful as well. I think that this is set up similar to Enviro Atlas, and I think there are a few helpful features that this map could benefit from. So that's a great suggestion.
Sounds like several people have brought up adding more functionality about downloading data from the map. So we'll definitely be looking into that.
I do think that
Perfect.
question was referring to uploading information to it as well. So we might want to
Oh,
into
yes.
that as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then our final question in the Q&A indicates or asks, will data collected per CV salts be fed into this database?
So yes, and to the extent, so if when CV salts and management zones go out and do outreach and domestic well monitoring, that data goes from the Central Valley region into the state GeoTracker database. And then this Gamma system regularly pulls that data into the database. There is a distinction though, again, the CV salts data, when they used their, did their evaluations, they did include data from groundwater monitoring wells at, let's say, farms and the ILRP program. And to date, we've screened that data out. That's why our nitrate map looks slightly different than the CV salts map. Because again, even though domestic wells are shallower than community system wells many times, they're still deeper than, say, a first water type of monitoring well. So yes, domestic well being generated from CV salts will continue to be uploaded regularly.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. So Emily, let's bring up the future events coming up as we've answered all questions. And again, these questions are being saved, and we thank you for your feedback and your recommendations. So just to revisit this again, I know we did this earlier, but just so that you're aware and you can participate in more SAFER related events, here is the upcoming SAFER timeline for 2020. Again, we've got the 13th cost estimate webinar in October. Again, the 30th will be the finance dashboard will be launched. In November, we have the November 20th cost estimate webinar. And then in December, we have the SAFER advisory group meeting, which will fall on the 10th. And then on the 14th, the risk assessment webinar. So keep these dates written down so that way you can participate in more upcoming SAFER events. And let's see, I think we are close to our conclusion. And I just want to thank everyone today for joining us virtually, and I hope that your time was valuable. I thank you to our panelists that are very well informed and provided a great presentation, and thank you for allowing everyone to speak and have a voice in today's webinar. So thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you very much. And again, if you want to provide additional feedback after this webinar, you can always email us later. Again, we're looking for sort of official or officially unofficial comments by November 1st so that we can try to incorporate it into this year's version of the map. So, thank you all for your great questions today. It was really excellent to hear the feedback that you all had.
Yeah, great feedback.
Yes, thank you all.
Yeah, and thank you. Once again, this is John, and a reminder that our informational item before the board is currently scheduled for November 4th. We don't know what time of the day, you know how board meetings may be. So be looking for the agenda for the November 4th board meeting and looking for our item number.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. So yes, thank you everyone for your participation today. And we look forward to more events that will allow your feedback and your comments to be heard and welcomed. All right. And with that, we give you 4 minutes back into your day. So thank you for your time and have a great rest of your day.